The Honourable Member David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and congratulations too on your elevation to the post of Assistant Speaker. I want to address an issue that John Key mentioned in his address earlier on, and that was before the election he was emphatic that New Zealand would not become involved militarily in Iraq against the IS or the Islamic State. Immediately after the election, however, he changed his mind. Going to war, sir, is one of the most important decisions that any leader can take. And it seems to me that with the coming G20 next month, it looks to me that Mr Key wants to be part of that club of nations who has signed up to war in Iraq. When it comes to Kiwi lives, the security of New Zealanders, a sizable amount of money, not to mention the limits that we place on ourselves of things we can't do because we are involved in that particular theatre. We need to think very, very carefully. A sound rationale for New Zealand's involvement, in my opinion, sir, has not yet been made. And it should not be triggered by a desire to foot it on the world stage. We have to ask ourselves a number of questions. We have to ask ourselves, what would a deployment of our forces achieve and what would success look like? And on that, sir, we have absolutely no clue. Airstrikes is the main tactic, the chief tactic, yet every military analyst around the world agrees that airstrikes actually won't defeat Islamic State. That will require boots on the ground. So the war that we might send our forces to, even the experts agree, actually has no chance of winning. It is a half war. It is the imperative to do something even if it's stupid, as somebody said, because it just appears on our TV screens. As airstrikes continue, naturally what we'll see is the IS becoming more skilled at hiding within civilian populations. Bombs will inevitably hit civilians, and support for any action that we're involved with along with our allies will turn against us. And what will our forces do there? Well, if it involves the SAS, it's likely to be to advise and train on airstrikes and how to direct them. But we all know what that means from our experience in Afghanistan, that it won't stop there, that our troops, our forces are likely to be there on the ground working alongside directly Iraqis. Another question, what is the exit strategy and when should we leave? Well, if we don't know what we want to actually achieve, then it's impossible to know when the job is done and when it's time to go. So, frankly, sir, any deployment is unlikely to have an exit strategy. Another question, do we need to help our allies? After all, everybody else seems to be there, according to Mr Key. Why not us? Well, what it does seem to be saying, what the government does seem to be saying, is that we're not somehow facing up to our responsibilities, we're somehow deserting our allies. Let's remember that the Iraq War began within the Bush administration for ideological reasons. Our traditional allies joined in, the US, the UK, Australia, they all played an active role. But we were different. We did not join in. We chose not to. And I want to say there's a rule that's often been used, and it was used by Colin Powell during the Gulf War, called the Pottery Barn Rule. And the Pottery Barn Rule simply says, you break it, you own it. With Iraq, Powell said to President Bush, you will own the Iraqis' hopes, their aspirations and their problems. You'll own it all. But he said privately, but if you break it, you will own it. The US is right now owning what hasn't worked by its support of the Iraqi government and its military. But that doesn't logically flow through to us in New Zealand. Another question, should we be involved because IS, after all, Islamic State, is a threat to New Zealand? John Key said yesterday that IS will rain carnage on the world. Really? I mean, really? Is IS about to bring terror and mayhem into our neighbourhoods? No. No, IS is sophisticated. It reaches out to local people and asks them to take up arms. And we need to take care about the radicalisation of fringe members of our peaceful and productive Muslim community here in New Zealand. But a study by the Royal United Services Institute in the UK showed that, quote, there is no longer any serious disagreement that the UK's role in the Iraq war increased the radicalisation of Muslims. Far from reducing international terrorism, the 2003 invasion of Iraq had the effect of promoting it. Look, if the cause is right, then we accept in New Zealand the risk. But we should understand that a deployment of forces in Iraq could create greater insecurity in New Zealand. Mr. Key also argues that this is an international, a regional and a local problem. No, this is a conflict which is and should be regional. It's us that is making it international and trying to internationalise it. So let's not use the politics of fear to justify a deployment which simply does not stack up. IS is not threatening the world. They are brutish, they are nasty, they use terror and atrocities as weapons to dominate parts of two countries. Let's remember what Tony Blair said in 2002. He said that he and his cabinet declared that Iraq posed an imminent threat to Britain. Now that's laughable today. That's laughable today, but it was rhetoric designed to justify a war, and we should take care not to exaggerate what IS may threaten in order to justify our military action ourselves. The Middle East does have one law that we should adhere to, and that is the law of unintended consequences. The region, as I know, is hugely complex, the situation is immensely fluid, and the agendas are multiple. We are deluding ourselves if we believe that we are going to make a measurable difference by putting our people on the ground. Western interventions historically have commonly ended in disaster. And if the US knew how Iraq would have ended when it began and when it went in there 10 years ago, you wonder whether they would have actually invaded had they known that. My answer is almost certainly no. We have no idea of how this will end or what consequences might occur. Neutralising Islamic State, for example, is likely to strengthen Syrian President Assad, a man who thinks little of gassing his own people. And thanks to him, nearly 200,000 people, Syrians, have died in the last 3 years in the war that he began. Already many Muslims are hostile to more Western interference as they see it against them. What should we do then instead? We should all detest the IS, its tactics and its agenda. We feel minorities should be protected. The US airstrikes did in Iraq enable the minority Yazidis to reach safety because the US-trained Iraqi army was so hopeless to protect them itself. The strategy to deal with IS needs to be broad. For example, there is much less focus than there is on airstrikes to cut oil shipments from IS areas through Turkey or shut off its arms supplies that are coming in and feeding it. We need to identify clearly when our job is done and when it is time to go, something we have no measure of at the moment. We should stop speaking of a global threat when it's clearly not. We should accept that our involvement might bring greater risk to New Zealand. And we should make up our own minds, not feel an obligation to blindly follow along behind others. Instead, what we need to be doing is to use our place on the Security Council to organise the UN resolution to achieve a truly international response against the abuses of IS. We should continue to increase our humanitarian assistance. We have an obligation to do that. We should look carefully at whether there are actually more deserving areas to spend our very limited forces and logistics that we have. Boko Haram in Nigeria is equally as commits equally atrocious abuses as what is happening in IS. Can we, for example, or should we contribute to stopping the spread of Ebola? Kiwis, as ever, are always willing to do the right thing.
The member's time has expired.